Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about an historical event, and I will make the connection to our own times. And this is something that I always try to do in my videos regarding historical events. So, back in 1846, there was a slaughter of the Polish nobility by Polish peasants. So, Polish peasants, for about 2 months, butchered Polish nobles. It was the poor killing the rich, which is the typical situation that happens in uprisings. The poor are incited to kill the rich. When it comes to revolutions and pogroms, they will say that your enemy are these wealthy people and they're taking all of the money, or they're super wealthy merchants and they're richer than you and you are poor. And the reason why you're poor is because you haven't killed these people yet. And this is what you always will see in peasant rebellions and uprisings. We saw this with, of course, the French Revolution. We saw this with the Bolsheviks. And we also saw this with the slaughter of the Poles in Volyn by Ukrainian nationalists. The Ukrainian nationalists would argue that Polish people owned a lot of the land and they owned a lot of the churches, and so they needed to be slaughtered. Back in the medieval period, there was a slaughter of the Catholic population in Constantinople by the Eastern Orthodox, and about 60,000 or so Roman Catholics were butchered by Eastern Orthodox fanatics, and they were incited to kill Catholics because the Catholics were, not all the Catholics, but they were Catholic merchants who were making a lot of money, and they were out competing the local Greek merchants and businesses. And so a bunch of provocateurs said, hey, go kill all the Catholics. And so tens of thousands of Catholics were butchered. So you always will see this sort of propaganda being done when a group of people want another certain group of people dead. They'll say, well, those people have more money, so kill them. So in the case of the Polish peasant rebellion against their nobles in 1846, it was basically the same argumentation. These people have a lot of money, they rule over you, they are abusing the serfs, we have to destroy serfdom, blah, 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 blah. So for about 2 months, Polish peasants butchered around 1,000 or so Polish nobles. The number of nobles that were killed kind of varies. Some people say it was 1,000, some say 2,000, maybe it was somewhere in the middle. A lot of people were killed, and it was very, very brutal. Now, there were a group of people who were inciting all of this and were backing it and supporting it. These were the Austrians. The Austrians were backing this peasant rebellion against the Polish nobles. Why? Why would they do this? Why did the Austrians offer money and salt to a peasant in exchange for the decapitated heads of Polish nobles? This is what the peasants would do. They would kill nobles, cut their heads off, and then they would give the heads to their Austrian backers, and they would, in exchange, they would get money and salt. It's like something out of the Rwandan genocide. But the Austrians supported this peasant rebellion against the nobles because the nobles were actually in the process of planning their own rebellion against the Austrians, against the Austrian Empire. And so the Austrians wanted to squash this rebellion that was being organized by the nobles by inciting a rebellion amongst the peasants against the nobles. So the nobles were trying to cause a revolution. Okay, have the peasants rebel against the nobles and kill the nobles to crush the revolution that is being planned by the nobles. And this was the whole reasoning behind the Austrians backing and supporting of the peasant rebellion. You see this a lot in Austrian history. You see the Austrians backing some sort of nationalism as a way to squash their enemies. For example, the Ukrainians weren't always called Ukrainians. They were called Ruthenians. And then at some point within the early 20th century, the Ruthenians, very much so influenced by nationalism, began to call themselves Ukrainians. The Poles, who were under the Austrians, they wanted to do a rebellion against Austrian rule. And so to squash Polish rebellion, they began to back Ruthenian nationalism. And they began to support Ruthenian nationalism. And with Austria's backing, Ruthenian/Ukrainian nationalism grew. Ukrainian nationalism's sinister nature manifested itself in the slaughter of the Polish people in Galicia, in Volyn. Well, the Ukrainian nationalists slaughtered around 100,000 or so ethnic Polish people in Volyn, in Galicia, basically in what is today Western Ukraine. The Austrians would support Ukrainian nationalism because they wanted to crush the aspiration of the Poles to gain independence from Austrian rule. Fast forward to the 1930s, and you see Hitler, an Austrian, invading Poland and supporting Ukrainian nationalism. So really you see this pattern. In 1846, the Austrians supported a Polish peasant rebellion against Polish nobles to stop Polish nobles from rebelling against Austrian rule. And I also must add something to this. The Polish nobles who wanted to overthrow Austrian rule planned to give rights to peasants. So the nobles were actually trying to help the peasant class. The Austrians incited the peasants against the nobles to prevent this revolution from happening. And the peasant rebels slaughtered the very nobles who were planning on helping them. So we saw in 1846 the Austrians supporting a Polish peasant rebellion to squash Polish nobles who wanted independence from Austrian rule. Fast forward to 1848, when the Poles were working to gain independence from the Austrian Empire, and you can see Austria supporting Ruthenian/Ukrainian nationalism in order to prevent Poland from getting independence. Fast forward to World War II, you see Hitler, an Austrian, supporting Ukrainian nationalism to exterminate the Poles. So you see this pattern. After the Second World War, there was an agreement that was made between the Soviet Union and the Allies, and the agreement was regarding basically the condition of the territories that were under the control of the Third Reich. And part of the agreement was pertaining to Austria. What is the state of Austria? How do we see Austria? And basically what the agreement said was that Austria was the first victim of the Third Reich. And then after that, it said, well, also Austria holds a lot of responsibility for the Third Reich. I mean, given the fact that Hitler was Austrian, given the fact that a lot of the Nazi leadership was Austrian, Adolf Eichmann, Amon Goth, given the fact that the Austrians were huge supporters of the National Socialist Party, the fact that you could see that 10% of the Austrian population at one point were actually members of the National Socialist Party. The fact that the majority of Austrians voted in favor for becoming one with Germany. All of these facts. The fact that you had a number of death camps in Austria. You had, for example, I think it's called the Mauthausen death camp. All of these facts made it very clear that Austria was greatly responsible for the horrors of the Third Reich, the Reign of Terror. But the Austrians did not really cling so much unto the second part of the statement. It really clung unto the first part, which was that Austria was the first victim of the Third Reich. And so the Austrians began to pose themselves as victims. We were just victims. We were the first victim of the Third Reich. The Third Reich, Germany invaded us, blah, blah, blah. When the reality was that the Germans went over there and said, okay, let's do this Anschluss, or however you pronounce it, and let's have Austria become one in union with Germany. And the Austrians were completely in favor of this. Now, of course, there were some dissidents, but nonetheless, most Austrians supported that, and the ones who didn't were persecuted. So the Austrians clung into this idea that they were just kind of an innocent victim. And that was something that was to their favor. And the fact that so many Austrians clung to this idea that they were victims and that they weren't really responsible, that really shows the sinister nature of the country, the sinister part of the country. And today, you see Austria working for power, working to control territory. Not a lot of people jumped on this, but in 2018, the then Chancellor of Austria, Mr. Sebastian Kurz, basically said that he wanted to see more Balkan countries, more of the Balkans under the EU, but not just that, because the Germans today are still saying this. And Croatia recently entered the Eurozone. Sebastian Kurz also said that he wanted to see Austrian border patrol officers in the Balkans to prevent refugees from going into Austria. And as soon as I saw that, I knew exactly what this was. This was basically Austria's attempt of making an incremental step towards controlling the Balkans. And it really went to show that the aspiration for empire is still there. Just as the Austrians annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, today they still want to control the Balkans. There's still this aspiration for empire. You still see it. And I don't really believe that countries change all that much. I think that they may change their faces, they may change how they present themselves, they may change the tone of their rhetoric, but I think the aspirations are still there. You know, I believe that if Poland could have its Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth again, it would do it. If Turkey could control Armenia, it would do it. If Turkey could control those Aegean islands that are under Greece, it would do it, 100%. Absolutely. If Turkey could bring back its empire, it would do it. And if Germany could bring back the Reich, it would do it. I don't really believe that countries change too much. Look, Japan and Russia are still in a territorial dispute over the Sakhalin. It's under Russia. It is under Russia. The Russians took it in the Second World War, but the Japanese still think it belongs to them. They still have territorial disputes. And China and Japan are still in a territorial dispute over the what's it called? Senkaku Islands. And they're rivaling over maritime territory. The aspiration for empire is still there. It's still lingering in the air. And as time goes on, I think this will become more and more clear. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.